Pay attention to the timestamp. June 3rd, 2:47 a.m. Hospital corridor, 3rd floor. The hallway is empty except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beep of patient monitors. A figure enters the frame, surgical scrubs, confident stride, badge clipped to chest. He glances left, then right. The coast is clear. He approaches room 337, turns the handle, slips inside. Through the frosted glass door, you can see two shadows merge into one. An embrace, a kiss. This is where it begins. But what you're watching isn't just an affair. It's the first frame of a story that will end with 8 bodies and a murder caught on camera. The man in that room is Dr. Richard Caldwell, 45 years old, one of the most respected cardiothoracic surgeons at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. The woman is Maria Santos, 29, an ICU nurse who came to America 5 years ago with nothing but a nursing degree and a dream. Right now, they believe they're invisible. They believe the hospital's blind spots will protect them. They have no idea that every stolen moment, every secret meeting, every whispered promise is being recorded. And they definitely don't know that in 5 months, those recordings will be used to solve a murder. Maria's murder. Maria Santos arrived in Portland, Oregon, on a rainy September afternoon 4 years ago. She was 24 years old, alone and terrified. The flight from Manila had taken 19 hours. She carried one suitcase, a nursing degree from the University of Santo Tomas, and her mother's rosary wrapped around her wrist. Her English was good but accented. Her confidence was fragile. She'd passed her NCLEX exam on the first try, secured a work visa, and accepted a position as an ICU nurse at OHSU Hospital. The American dream, they called it. Maria called it survival. She rented a studio apartment in Northeast Portland, small, clean, affordable. She sent half her paycheck home to Manila every month. Her mother was sick. Her younger brother needed tuition money. Maria lived on instant noodles and worked double shifts because that's what immigrants do when failure isn't an option. But Maria wasn't just surviving. She was good at her job. Exceptional, even. Her patients loved her. Her colleagues respected her. She had a gift for reading vital signs, for noticing the subtle changes that separated a stable patient from a coding one. She was calm under pressure, compassionate in crisis, and dedicated in a way that made the older nurses shake their heads and say, "That girl's going to burn out if she doesn't slow down." But Maria didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. By the time June rolled around, Maria had been working ICU for 4 years. She was no longer the frightened immigrant who jumped every time a doctor barked orders. She was confident, respected, trusted. She knew the hospital inside and out, the shortcuts through the basement corridors, the blind spots in the CCTV coverage, the supply closets where nurses hid when they needed 5 minutes of peace. She knew which doctors were competent and which ones were dangerous. She knew which surgeons treated nurses like colleagues and which ones treated them like waitresses. And she knew Dr. Richard Caldwell. Everyone knew Richard Caldwell. He was the hospital's golden boy, 45 years old, cardiothoracic surgeon, specializing in high-risk valve replacements and bypass surgeries. He had steady hands, a calm demeanor, and a success rate that made him a legend in the OR. Patients requested him by name. Families trusted him with their lives. The hospital administration adored him because he brought in revenue and prestige. Richard looked the part, too tall, fit, prematurely silver hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. He wore expensive watches and tailored scrubs. He drove a Tesla. He lived in a sprawling home in the West Hills with his wife of 18 years and their 2 teenage children. From the outside, Richard Caldwell's life was perfect. From the outside. But Maria didn't meet Richard in the OR. She met him on a Tuesday night in June during a shift that should have been routine. A 72-year-old patient, post-op from valve replacement surgery, coded at 11:38 p.m. Maria was the first responder. She initiated CPR, called the code, managed the crash cart while the team scrambled. Richard arrived within 2 minutes. He'd been in the surgical wing reviewing charts. He took command immediately, called orders, worked the patient for 43 minutes. But the heart wouldn't restart. Too much damage. Too much time. At 12:21 a.m., Richard called it. Time of death. The room emptied slowly. Nurses cleaned up. The body was prepped for the morgue. Maria stood in the hallway, staring at nothing. She'd lost patients before, it was part of the job, but it never got easier. Richard found her there 20 minutes later. He was still in his surgical cap, mask pulled down around his neck. "You did everything right," he said quietly. Maria looked up at him. His eyes were kind, tired, human. "Doesn't feel like it," she replied. Richard smiled, a sad, understanding smile. "It never does. Come on, let's get coffee." They sat in the break room for 2 hours. The coffee was terrible, burnt and bitter, but neither of them cared. They talked about the patient, about the surgery, about the impossible weight of holding someone's life in your hands and failing. Richard opened up in a way that surprised her. He wasn't the untouchable surgeon anymore. He was just a man who was tired and sad and human. He told her about his first patient death as a resident, a 19-year-old kid with a congenital heart defect. He told her how he'd gone home that night and cried in the shower for an hour. "You never forget them," Richard said. "The ones you lose, they stay with you." Maria found herself talking too, about her mother's illness, about the guilt of being so far away, about the pressure of sending money home every month while living on scraps. Richard listened, really listened. He didn't offer empty platitudes or condescending advice. He just listened. And something shifted between them in that fluorescent-lit break room at 2 a.m., something neither of them intended. The affair didn't start that night, but the door opened. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard found excuses to seek Maria out. He asked her opinion on post-op care plans. He complimented her clinical instincts. He lingered in the ICU longer than necessary, chatting with her during slow moments. Maria told herself it was professional, collegial, but she felt the pull. The way his eyes lingered on her. The way his hand brushed hers when he handed her a chart. The way her heart rate spiked every time he walked into the room. On June 17th, Richard texted her. He'd gotten her number from the staff directory. "Night shift again?" Maria hesitated, then replied, "Yeah. You. Finishing paperwork. Want company?" She should have said no. She knew she should have said no, but she didn't. They met in the break room again, talked until 3 a.m. And when Richard walked her to her car in the parking garage, he kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. It was impulsive and desperate and wrong. Maria kissed him back. That's how it started. A kiss in a parking garage at 3:17 a.m., captured by the hospital's exterior CCTV camera. Timestamp burned into the digital file. Neither of them knew they were being recorded. Neither of them cared. The affair escalated quickly. Within a week, they were meeting every night. Richard worked late. Empty patient rooms, supply closets, the parking garage. Maria's apartment became their sanctuary. Richard would text her when he was on his way, park 2 blocks away, walk to her building with his hood up. He'd stay for a few hours, then leave before dawn. They were careful, or so they thought. Richard's wife suspected nothing. His colleagues suspected nothing. Maria's friends noticed she seemed distracted, happier, but she blamed it on extra shifts. The secrecy made it intoxicating, forbidden, dangerous. Maria knew it was wrong. Richard was married. He had children. She was risking her job, her reputation, her visa status. But when he looked at her like she was the only person in the world, when he whispered that he'd never felt this way before, when he held her in the dark and told her she made him feel alive again, she believed him. She believed he'd leave his wife. She believed they had a future. She believed the lies people tell themselves when they're falling in love with the wrong person. By August, Richard had given Maria everything. His personal cell number, his login credentials for the hospital database. "I trust you completely," he'd said. Keys to his office. He told her about his surgeries, his stress, his fear of failure. He drank more when he was with her, whiskey straight, 2 or 3 glasses while they lay in her bed. He talked in his sleep sometimes, mumbled about complications, about patience, about pressure. Maria didn't think much of it. Surgeons carried heavy burdens. Losses haunted them. But looking back, Maria would realize those were the first signs. The cracks in Richard's perfect facade. The shadow of something darker lurking beneath the surface. If she'd paid closer attention, if she'd questioned the way he tensed when she asked about specific surgeries, if she'd noticed the way he deflected when she mentioned patient outcomes, maybe she would have seen it sooner. Maybe she would have realized she wasn't falling in love with a brilliant surgeon. She was falling in love with a monster. But Maria Santos didn't see it. Not yet. She was too busy believing in a future that would never come. A future that would end in an ICU room at 4:49 a.m. with a flatline and 8 murder charges. October 28th, 11:47 p.m. Maria's apartment. The knock on the door startled her. She wasn't expecting Richard tonight. But when she opened it, she knew something was wrong. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands were shaking. He smelled like whiskey and antiseptic. What happened? Maria asked, pulling him inside. Richard collapsed onto her couch, head in his hands. I lost another one. Maria's stomach tightened. Another one. That phrase had become too familiar. Who? She asked quietly. Richard didn't look at her. James Hartford, 63. Routine bypass. He was stable. Everything went perfectly. And then his heart just stopped. We coded him for 30 minutes. Nothing. Maria sat beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder. Richard, sometimes. It's the 7th one, Maria. His voice cracked. 7 patients in 14 months. All during my surgeries. All sudden. All unexplained. Maria's hand froze on his shoulder. 7. She'd known about a few complications, every surgeon had them. But 7 deaths in 14 months? That wasn't normal. That was a pattern. Richard looked at her then, and something in his eyes made her blood run cold. Fear. Desperation. Guilt. They're going to review my cases, he whispered. The hospital board. They're going to think I'm incompetent. My career is over. Maria wanted to comfort him. But a different instinct kicked in, the instinct that made her a good nurse. The instinct that noticed details, patterns, anomalies. Richard, she said carefully, were they all high-risk patients? He shook his head. That's the thing. They weren't. Low risk. Healthy. Routine procedures. That's what makes it so bad. Maria's mind raced. 7 healthy patients. 7 deaths. 14 months. What did the autopsies show? Richard stood abruptly. I don't want to talk about this anymore. He poured himself another drink, downed it, grabbed his coat. I need to go. Richard. I'll call you tomorrow. He left. The door slammed. Maria sat alone in her apartment, staring at the wall, her mind spinning. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. She couldn't sleep that night. At 6 a.m., Maria gave up, made coffee, opened her laptop. She told herself she was being paranoid. Richard was a brilliant surgeon. Complications happened. Bad luck happened. But 7 deaths? She had to know. Maria logged into the hospital database using Richard's credentials, the ones he'd given her months ago, back when trust between them was absolute. She navigated to surgical records, filtered by attending physician, Dr. Richard Caldwell. Filtered by outcome, patient deceased. The list populated. 7 names. 7 dates. Maria clicked on the first one. Patient. Helen Park, 52 years old. Procedure. Mitral valve replacement. Date. March 12th. Outcome. Cardiac arrest during surgery. Pronounced dead at 10:47 a.m. Maria read the surgical notes. Routine procedure. No complications reported until sudden cardiac arrest. Resuscitation failed. Cause of death. Surgical complication. Cardiac event. She clicked on the second file. Patient. James Liu, 61 years old. Procedure, coronary artery bypass. Date. May 3rd. Outcome. Intraoperative hemorrhage. Pronounced dead at 2:14 p.m. Again, the notes described a routine procedure that suddenly went catastrophic. Maria's hands were trembling now. She opened the 3rd file. The 4th. The 5th. The pattern was identical. Routine surgeries, healthy patients, sudden, unexplained crises, deaths, all within 14 months, all under Richard Caldwell's care. Maria sat back, heart pounding. This wasn't bad luck. This was statistically impossible. She spent the next 3 days digging. She cross-referenced the patient files with insurance records, family contact information, hospital incident reports. And that's when the real horror revealed itself. Every single one of the 7 patients had life insurance policies exceeding $1 million. Every single family had signed a do not resuscitate order immediately before surgery. And in every single case, Dr. Richard Caldwell had personally counseled the families, explaining the risks, recommending the DNR just in case. Maria felt sick. She opened a new document on her laptop, titled it Evidence RC, and started compiling everything. She screenshot surgical notes. She photographed medical charts using her phone during shifts, original notes versus revised notes, discrepancies, alterations. She found financial records showing Richard had consulted for 3 of the families after the deaths, helping them navigate insurance claims. He'd co-signed loans for 2 families. He'd referred them to lawyers. He was connected to these families financially. Maria's hands shook as she typed her conclusions into the document. Richard Caldwell is selecting wealthy patients with large life insurance policies. He's convincing families to sign DNRs. He's killing patients during surgery and making it look like complications. He's profiting from their deaths. November 10th. Maria had been investigating for 2 weeks. Her folder was full of evidence, spreadsheets tracking the patients, their policies, the DNR forms, Richard's financial connections. She had audio recordings, too. Richard talked in his sleep when he stayed over, and Maria had started recording him on her phone. In one recording, Richard muttered, "Just make it look like a complication. They'll never know. Unavoidable loss." Maria listened to that recording 5 times, tears streaming down her face. The man she loved was a serial killer. She didn't want to believe it. She wanted there to be another explanation. But the evidence was undeniable. Richard wasn't just a surgeon who'd had bad luck. He was a predator in scrubs, a murderer hiding behind a medical license. And Maria had been sleeping with him for 5 months. She felt like she was going to vomit. How had she not seen it? How had she been so blind? The late-night anxiety, the drinking, the nightmares, the way he deflected questions about his patients. It was all there. She just hadn't wanted to see it. Maria closed her laptop. She had a decision to make. She could go to the police. But would they believe her? She'd accessed records using stolen credentials. She was having an affair with the suspect. Her credibility was compromised. Or she could confront Richard first. Give him a chance to turn himself in. Maybe that was naive. Maybe that was stupid. But Maria still had a sliver of hope that the man she'd fallen in love with had some shred of decency left. November 14th, 8:30 p.m. Maria texted Richard. "We need to talk. Tonight. My place." Richard arrived at 9 p.m. He smiled when she opened the door, leaned in to kiss her. Maria stepped back. "Sit down," she said. Richard's smile faded. "What's wrong?" Maria opened her laptop, turned it toward him. On the screen, the spreadsheet. 7 names. 7 insurance policies. 7 deaths. Richard's face went white. "Maria, I know what you've been doing." Her voice was steady, cold. "I know about the patients, the DNRs, the insurance money. I have evidence, Richard. Screenshots, recordings, everything." Richard stood, hands raised like he was calming a spooked animal. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Maria's voice shook now, anger breaking through. "You're killing people. You're murdering patients for money. How could you? How could you do this?" Richard's expression shifted. The charm vanished. Something darker took its place. "You don't know what it's like," he said quietly. "The pressure, the debt, medical school loans, mortgage, private school tuition, my wife's spending. I'm drowning, Maria. Those patients were going to die anyway. They were healthy," Maria shouted. You selected them because they were healthy, because their families had money. Richard took a step toward her. You can't tell anyone. I already decided, Maria said. You have until November 16th. 48 hours. Turn yourself in or I go to the police myself. Richard stared at her. Maria, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about us. There is no us. Maria's voice cracked. There never was. You used me. You gave me your login credentials so I'd be implicated if anyone found out. You made me an accessory. I loved you, Richard. I loved a monster. Richard tried to speak, but Maria cut him off. Get out. You have 48 hours. After that, I'm taking everything I have to the police. Richard looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed quietly behind him. Maria collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. She'd done the right thing. She knew she'd done the right thing. But it didn't feel like victory. Felt like betrayal. Like loss. Like the end of everything. What Maria didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Richard Caldwell had no intention of turning himself in. As he drove home that night, his mind was already working through the logistics. Maria had evidence. Maria was a threat, and threats had to be eliminated. He'd done it 7 times before. He could do it again. By the time Richard pulled into his driveway, the plan was already forming. Maria Santos had 48 hours to live. She just didn't know it yet. November 15th, 6:23 a.m., Richard Caldwell sat in his car in the hospital parking lot. Engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. He hadn't slept. His mind had been racing all night, calculating, planning, eliminating variables. Maria had given him 48 hours. That meant by 9 p.m. on November 16th, she'd walk into a police station with her laptop full of evidence and destroy everything he'd built. His career, his reputation, his freedom, his life. Richard wasn't going to let that happen. He'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, risked too much to let some idealistic nurse with a hero complex take him down. Maria had made a fatal mistake. She'd told him about the evidence. She'd given him time. And most importantly, she'd trusted that he'd do the right thing. Richard Caldwell had stopped doing the right thing a long time ago. He entered the hospital through the main entrance, nodded at the security guard, swiped his badge. Normal routine. Normal day. He had a surgery scheduled at 10 a.m. A valve replacement, straightforward, low risk. He'd perform it perfectly because that's what Richard Caldwell did. He was a surgeon. He saved lives. Except when he didn't. Richard took the elevator to the 3rd floor, walked to his office, locked the door behind him. He pulled out his personal laptop, not the hospital-issued one, and opened an encrypted browser. He'd done this research before, back when he'd first started planning the patient deaths. Back when he'd needed methods that were effective, untraceable, and easily disguised as natural medical complications. He searched, bacterial gastroenteritis severe enough to require hospitalization. The results populated. Salmonella typhi. Symptoms: severe abdominal cramping, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, dehydration. Onset: 6 to 12 hours after exposure. Severity: high enough to require emergency hospitalization, especially in otherwise healthy individuals. Richard leaned back in his chair. Perfect. If Maria got sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, his hospital, he'd have access to her, control over her care, the ability to finish what needed to be finished. And the beauty of it was that no one would question a sudden cardiac arrest in a patient already compromised by severe illness. It would look natural. Tragic, but natural. Richard checked his watch. 7:15 a.m. Maria would be finishing her night shift right now. Exhausted, distracted. She'd go home, sleep for a few hours, maybe review her evidence again. She wouldn't be expecting him. Richard opened a drawer in his desk, pulled out a key. Maria's apartment key. She'd given it to him 2 months ago. Back when they were still pretending this was a relationship with a future. Back when she'd smiled and said, "Now you can surprise me." Richard pocketed the key. He had one more stop to make before surgery. The hospital's microbiology lab was in the basement, tucked away in a corner most staff forgot existed. Richard had privileges there. He'd consulted on infectious disease cases before, had legitimate reasons to access bacterial cultures for research purposes. He took the stairs down, avoiding the elevator cameras. The lab was empty except for one technician, a young guy Richard didn't recognize. "Dr. Caldwell," the tech said, looking up. "Can I help you?" Richard smiled, his charming, trustworthy doctor smile. "I need a culture sample for a research proposal. Salmonella typhi. Just a small sample, standard containment protocols." The tech hesitated. "I'll need to log it." "Of course," Richard said smoothly. "Patient outcomes study. I'll send you the IRB approval by end of day." The tech nodded, disappeared into the back. Richard's heart pounded, but his face remained calm. 2 minutes later, the tech returned with a sealed vial containing the bacterial culture. Richard signed the log with a fake study number, thanked the tech, and left. By 8 a.m., Richard was back in his office, the vial hidden in his briefcase. He had everything he needed. Maria's shift ended at 7:30 a.m. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She'd barely slept in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face. The way he'd looked at her when she confronted him. Not remorse, not shame, calculation, like he was already figuring out his next move. Maria drove home on autopilot, parked in her building's lot, trudged up the stairs to her apartment. She needed sleep. She needed to think. She needed to figure out her next steps. Should she go to the police today? Wait the full 48 hours like she'd promised? What if Richard ran? What if he destroyed evidence? Maria unlocked her apartment door, stepped inside, dropped her bag on the floor. Everything looked normal, quiet, safe. She didn't notice the faint scent of Richard's cologne still lingering in the air. Didn't notice the slightly ajar kitchen cabinet that she always kept closed. Didn't notice that someone had been here. Richard had arrived at Maria's apartment at 1:47 p.m. He'd parked 3 blocks away, walked casually, hood up, face down. Just another pedestrian in northeast Portland. No one noticed him. No one ever did. He'd used Maria's key, slipped inside, closed the door quietly behind him. The apartment was empty. Maria was at home sleeping. He'd checked the ICU schedule, knew she'd worked overnight, knew she'd be unconscious for at least 6 hours. Richard moved quickly. He went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator. Inside, leftover pasta in a plastic container. Maria meal prepped on her days off, made cheap, simple meals that she could reheat between shifts. Richard pulled out the container, set it on the counter. He opened his briefcase, removed the vial of Salmonella typhi, put on latex gloves. He opened the vial carefully, used a sterile dropper to extract a small amount of the bacterial culture, mixed it into the pasta sauce, stirred it thoroughly. The bacteria would survive the reheating process, would activate in her digestive system within hours. Richard sealed the container, placed it back in the refrigerator exactly where he'd found it. He walked through the apartment, looking for Maria's laptop. He checked the kitchen table, nothing. The living room, nothing. Then he saw it partially hidden under a pillow on the couch. He opened it. Password protected. Richard tried a few obvious combinations. Maria's birthday, her mother's name, Manila. Nothing worked. He didn't have time to crack it, didn't want to risk triggering a security lockout. He closed the laptop, placed it back exactly where he'd found it. It didn't matter. Once Maria was dead, the laptop would be sealed as part of her estate. He'd find a way to access it, destroy it. Or maybe the police wouldn't even look. Why would they? Maria Santos, young ICU nurse, sudden illness, tragic death. No reason to suspect foul play. Richard checked his watch. 2:03 p.m. He'd been inside for 16 minutes. Time to go. He wiped down every surface he'd touched, removed his gloves, pocketed them. He took one last look around the apartment. Everything in place, no trace of his presence. Then he left, locking the door behind him. By 2:20 p.m., Richard was back at the hospital, scrubbed in for an afternoon surgery, the picture of professional competence. And 3 miles away, in a small apartment in northeast Portland, A container of poisoned pasta sat waiting in the refrigerator. Maria woke up at 5:47 p.m., groggy and disoriented. She'd slept longer than intended, almost 10 hours. Her body had needed it. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, checked her phone. No messages from Richard. Good. She didn't want to hear from him. Didn't want his excuses, his manipulations, his lies. Maria stood, stretched, walked to the kitchen. She was starving. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. She opened the refrigerator, pulled out the pasta container, popped it in the microwave. 3 minutes later, she was sitting on the couch, eating mechanically, scrolling through her phone. The pasta tasted fine. Normal. Maybe a little bland, but that's how she always made it. Maria finished the container, rinsed it, set it in the sink. She felt better now, more clear-headed. She needed to finalize her plan. Tomorrow, November 16th, she'd go to the police. She'd bring her laptop, show them everything. They'd investigate. They'd find the truth. And Richard Caldwell would spend the rest of his life in prison. Maria opened her laptop, pulled up the evidence folder one more time. She wanted to make sure everything was organized, clear, irrefutable. She spent 2 hours reviewing documents, adding notes, creating a timeline. By 8 p.m., she was satisfied. This was solid. This would hold up. Maria closed the laptop, leaned back against the couch. She felt a slight cramp in her abdomen, probably just hunger pangs. She'd eaten too quickly. She ignored it. By 9 p.m., the cramps were worse. Sharp, twisting pain in her stomach. Maria stood, walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face. Probably just stress. She'd been under so much pressure lately. Her body was reacting. By 10 p.m., Maria was vomiting. Violent, uncontrollable heaving that left her weak and shaking. She tried to drink water, couldn't keep it down. The cramps intensified. Felt like something was tearing her apart from the inside. By 11:30 p.m., Maria knew something was seriously wrong. She could barely stand. Her heart was racing. She checked her pulse, found it rapid and irregular. She was a nurse. She knew the signs. Severe gastroenteritis, dehydration, possible sepsis. She needed help. Maria crawled to her phone, dialed 911. Her voice was barely a whisper. I need ambulance. I'm sick. Can't breathe. The dispatcher stayed on the line, kept her talking, assured her help was coming. Maria lay on the bathroom floor, shivering, clutching her mother's rosary. She thought about Richard. Had he done this? Had he poisoned her? No, that was paranoid. Impossible. She was just sick, just bad luck. But even as she tried to convince herself, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "He's killing you, just like he killed them." The paramedics arrived at 11:47 p.m. They found Maria barely conscious, severely dehydrated, vitals unstable. They started in 4, loaded her onto a stretcher, transported her to OHSU hospital. The same hospital where she worked. The same hospital where Richard Caldwell waited. By 12:20 a.m. on November 16th, Maria Santos was admitted to the emergency room. And 3 floors above, Dr. Richard Caldwell received an alert on his phone. A notification that one of his contacts had been admitted. He smiled. Phase 1 complete. Now came the hard part. November 16th, 1:15 a.m. emergency room attending physician Dr. Sarah Chun stood over Maria Santos's bed, reviewing vitals on the monitor. Heart rate, 118 BPM. Blood pressure, 90/60. Temperature, 102.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen saturation, 94%. Maria was conscious but barely. Eyes half open, skin pale and clammy, lips cracked from dehydration. Dr. Chun had seen severe gastroenteritis before, but something about this case felt off. The onset was too rapid, the symptoms too severe. "Maria," Dr. Chun said gently, leaning close. "Can you hear me?" Maria's eyes focused slowly. "Sarah." Her voice was a rasp. They'd worked together for 2 years. Dr. Chun knew Maria as competent, healthy, strong. Seeing her like this was jarring. "What did you eat today?" Dr. Chen asked. Maria's brow furrowed, thinking. "Pasta. Leftover pasta. That's all." Dr. Chen made notes. Possible food poisoning. She ordered a full workup. Complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic panel, stool cultures, toxicology screen. "We're going to admit you to ICU for monitoring," Dr. Chen said. "Get you rehydrated, run some tests. You're going to be okay." Maria nodded weakly, but deep down she wasn't sure. Something felt wrong. Felt deliberate. At 1:34 a.m., Maria was transferred to the ICU, the same unit where she'd worked hundreds of shifts. Her colleagues descended immediately, shocked to see one of their own as a patient. "Maria, oh my God. What happened?" "We've got you, don't worry." The ICU nurse on duty, Rebecca, started a second four-line, hung fluids, adjusted the monitors. Maria's attending physician ordered morphine for pain management. Within minutes, Maria felt the drug take hold, warmth spreading through her veins, pain dulling, consciousness slipping. She tried to fight it, tried to stay awake, but her body betrayed her. By 1:42 a.m., Maria Santos was sedated, unconscious, helpless. 3 floors above, in the surgical wing's on-call room, Dr. Richard Caldwell lay on a narrow bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. He'd been here since midnight, establishing his alibi. If anyone checked, if anyone asked, he'd been asleep, resting between cases. But Richard wasn't sleeping. He was waiting. At 2 a.m., he checked his phone. The hospital's internal patient tracking system showed Maria Santos admitted to ICU, bed 12, sedated, stable condition. Richard set an alarm for 2:45 a.m., closed his eyes, controlled his breathing. He needed to appear rested when he made his move. Needed to look like a doctor who'd been peacefully asleep, not a man about to commit murder. The alarm vibrated at 2:45 a.m. Richard sat up, stretched, put on his shoes. He walked to the surgical locker room, changed into fresh scrubs, surgical cap, mask. He flipped his ID badge backward on its lanyard, the name and photo facing his chest, only the barcode visible. Small detail, important detail. He pulled on gloves, pocketed a syringe he'd prepared earlier, 50 milliequivalent of potassium chloride drawn from the medication room during his last legitimate surgery. No one had questioned it. No one ever did. Surgeons had carte blanche access to medications. Richard checked his reflection in the locker room mirror. He looked like every other surgeon in this hospital. Tired, professional, invisible. At 3:02 a.m., Richard left the surgical wing, took the stairs down to the ICU level. Avoided the elevators, they had cameras logged every floor. The stairwells had blind spots. He knew them all. He emerged on the ICU floor, walked confidently down the hallway. Nurses at the station didn't look up. Another doctor making rounds. Nothing unusual. The hallway CCTV camera captured him at 3:52 a.m. Timestamp burned into the recording. Surgical scrubs. Backward badge. Purposeful stride. He reached bed 12, glanced left and right. The hallway was empty. He opened the door, stepped inside, closed it quietly behind him. Maria lay unconscious in the bed, monitors beeping steadily. Heart rate, 96 BPM. Blood pressure, 100/65. Oxygen saturation, 97%. She looked peaceful, fragile. Richard felt nothing. No remorse, no hesitation, no guilt. This was survival. Maria had forced his hand. She'd made herself a threat, and threats had to be eliminated. It was logical, necessary. Richard approached the four-pole, located the saline line running into Maria's left arm. He pulled the prepared syringe from his pocket. 50 milliequivalent of potassium chloride, colorless, odorless, deadly. Potassium chloride stops the heart by disrupting the electrical signals that regulate cardiac rhythm. In high doses, it causes instant cardiac arrest. It's used in lethal injections. It's also used in legitimate medical procedures, which made it the perfect murder weapon. undetectable unless specifically tested for. And why would anyone test for it? Maria was already sick, already compromised. Cardiac arrest in a critically ill patient wasn't suspicious. It was expected. Richard inserted the syringe into the foreport, pressed the plunger slowly. The medication flowed directly into Maria's bloodstream. He watched the monitor. Within 30 seconds, Maria's heart rate spiked. 110, 125, 140. The rhythm destabilized. Ventricular tachycardia. Her body convulsed once, a small jerk, then went still. Richard removed the syringe, pocketed it, stepped back. The monitor alarm would sound in less than a minute. He needed to be gone before that. He took one last look at Maria. Her eyes were closed. She looked like she was sleeping. She'd never wake up. Richard opened the door, stepped into the hallway, walked calmly toward the stairwell. Behind him, at exactly 4:02 a.m., the monitor alarm screamed. The ICU exploded into chaos. Code blue, bed 12. Code blue, bed 12. Rebecca sprinted to Maria's room, saw the flat line on the monitor, felt for a pulse. Nothing. She initiated chest compressions immediately, called for the crash cart. Within 90 seconds, the Code Blue team arrived. 2 physicians, 3 nurses, a respiratory therapist. They worked with desperate efficiency. Intubation, manual ventilation, chest compressions, hard, fast, unrelenting. The defibrillator charged. Clear. The shock delivered, Maria's body jerked. No response. Flatline. Resume compressions. Push AP. Epinephrine injected. Compressions continued. Another shock. Another round of meds. The team worked in grim silence, broken only by barked orders and the rhythmic thump of compressions. This was Maria, their colleague, their friend. They'd worked beside her for years. Now they were fighting to save her life. At 4:15 a.m., the ICU attending physician paged the on-call senior surgeon, protocol for critical codes. The page went to Dr. Richard Caldwell. Richard's phone buzzed. He was in the surgical wing locker room, changing back into his street clothes. He'd already disposed of the syringe in the biohazard incinerator. Gone forever, no trace. He looked at the page. Code Blue ICU bed 12. Assistance requested. Richard allowed himself a small smile. Perfect timing. He changed back into scrubs, jogged to the ICU, had to look concerned, hurried, engaged. He arrived at 4:18 a.m., pushed through the crowd outside Maria's room. "What do we have?" he asked, voice commanding. Rebecca looked up, eyes red. Maria Santos, 29, admitted with severe gastroenteritis, suddenly arrested. VTach into asystole. We've been coding for 16 minutes. Richard nodded, stepped to the bedside, took over compressions. His hands pressed rhythmically on Maria's chest, the same chest he'd kissed, held, whispered promises against. He felt nothing. Continue AP. Let's try calcium gluconate in case this is hyperkalemia. The medications were pushed. More compressions. Another shock. Nothing. Maria's heart refused to restart. At 4:35 a.m., reality set in. 23 minutes of continuous CPR. No response. Even if they got her back now, the brain damage would be catastrophic. Richard looked around the room, saw the exhaustion, the grief, the desperation on his colleagues' faces. He made a show of hesitation, looked at the monitor, looked at Maria. "Let's give it 4 more minutes," he said quietly. "She's young. She deserves every chance." The team nodded, grateful for the order. They wanted to keep trying, needed to believe they could save her. 4 more minutes of compressions, 4 more rounds of medications, for more shocks. At 4:49 a.m., Richard placed his hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "Stop compressions." Rebecca looked at him, tears streaming. "Dr. Caldwell." "She's gone," Richard said gently. "We did everything we could." Time of death, 4:49 a.m. The room fell silent except for the flat, endless tone of the monitor. Rebecca stepped back from the bed, sobbing. The other nurses embraced her. The physicians stood with heads bowed. Richard looked at Maria's face. Peaceful now, free of pain. He'd done it. She was gone. The evidence would die with her. He placed his hand on Maria's shoulder, a gesture of respect, of mourning. Inside, he felt only relief. She was a wonderful nurse, Richard said to the room. Dedicated, compassionate. This is a tremendous loss. The team murmured agreement. Richard stayed for another 10 minutes, helped with the postcode paperwork, offered condolences. Then he excused himself, said he needed to notify the family. He walked calmly to the elevator, rode to the surgical floor, returned to the on-call room, closed the door, sat on the bed, and breathed. It was over. Maria Santos was dead. The threat was eliminated. Richard Caldwell had gotten away with murder. Again. But 3 floors below, in the hospital's pathology lab, a night shift technician was processing Maria Santos's blood work. Routine labs drawn in the ER before she'd coded. The technician ran the tests, printed the results, filed them in the pending folder. Sitting in that folder was a number that would change everything. Potassium, 12.3 milliequivalent/L. Normal range, 3.5 to 5.0 milliequivalent/L. The level was lethal, impossible to achieve naturally. And in 48 hours, when the medical examiner reviewed Maria's autopsy and toxicology report, that number would trigger an investigation. That number would lead to CCTV footage. That number would expose a serial killer. Richard Caldwell thought he'd won. He thought he was safe. He had no idea the clock was already ticking. No idea that Maria Santos, even in death, would have the last word. November 17th, 9:14 a.m. Dr. Robert Hayes had been the chief medical examiner for Multnomah County for 17 years. He'd seen everything: gunshot wounds, overdoses, industrial accidents, suicides that looked like murders, and murders staged to look like suicides. But something about the Maria Santos case bothered him from the moment her body arrived at the morgue. She was 29 years old, healthy, no significant medical history, ICU nurse. And she died of sudden cardiac arrest following what was initially diagnosed as acute gastroenteritis. Young, healthy people didn't just die like that. Not without a reason. Dr. Hayes stood over Maria's body on the steel examination table, reviewing her medical chart from the hospital. Admitted at 12:20 a.m. with severe abdominal pain, vomiting, tachycardia. Treated with 4 fluids and morphine. Cardiac arrest at 4:02 a.m. pronounced dead at 4:49 a.m. The timeline was fast. Too fast. Hayes pulled on his gloves, adjusted his overhead light, and began the external examination. No signs of trauma. No defensive wounds. No bruising except the expected marks from CPR compressions. He opened her eyes, pupils fixed and dilated. Normal for cardiac arrest. He checked her hands, her nails, nothing unusual. Then he moved to the internal examination. Scalpel in hand, Y incision from shoulders to sternum to pubis. He opened her chest cavity, examined her heart. It was normal-sized, showed no signs of structural disease. No valve abnormalities. No coronary artery blockage. This heart should not have stopped. Hayes removed the heart, weighed it, sectioned it for microscopic analysis. Then he moved to her stomach and intestines, looking for the source of the gastroenteritis. He found inflammation consistent with bacterial infection, but nothing severe enough to cause death. Something else had killed Maria Santos. Hayes collected blood samples, tissue samples, stomach contents. He labeled everything meticulously, sent them to the toxicology lab with a note. Rush analysis. Full panel including electrolytes and heavy metals. Standard procedure for unexpected deaths in young, healthy individuals. The tox results would take 48 to 72 hours. Hayes stepped back from the table, stripped off his gloves, looked at Maria's face one more time. She'd been pretty, young, had her whole life ahead of her. "What happened to you?" he murmured. He didn't know yet, but he was going to find out. November 19th, 2:37 p.m. Dr. Hayes sat in his office, reviewing autopsy reports, when his desk phone rang. The toxicology lab. "Dr. Hayes, We have the results on Maria Santos. Hayes grabbed a pen. Go ahead. Potassium chloride. Blood potassium level is 12.3 milliequivalents per liter. Hayes stopped writing. Looked at the number he'd just written down. Read it again. Say that again. 12.3 milliequivalent/L. That's lethal. Anything over 6.5 is life-threatening. At 12.3, you're looking at instant cardiac arrest. Hayes's mind raced. Normal potassium, 3.5 to 5.0. Maria's level, 12.3. That wasn't naturally occurring. That couldn't be explained by illness or kidney failure or medication error. That was external administration. That was murder. Are you certain? Hayes asked. We ran it 3 times. Same result. There's no question. Someone injected potassium chloride into her system. And based on the concentration, it had to be intravenous. Directly into the bloodstream. Hayes hung up, sat back in his chair, stared at the ceiling. Maria Santos hadn't died of gastroenteritis or cardiac arrest. Maria Santos had been murdered. He picked up the phone again, dialed the Portland Police Bureau, asked for homicide. This is Dr. Robert Hayes, medical examiner. I need to report a homicide. Within an hour, Detective Lisa Martinez was sitting in Hayes's office, reading the toxicology report. Martinez was 43, lean and sharp-eyed, with 15 years in homicide and a reputation for being relentless. She'd solved cases other detectives had written off as unsolvable. She didn't believe in coincidences, and she didn't believe in giving up. Potassium chloride, Martinez said, setting down the report. That's what they use in lethal injections. Exactly, Hayes said. It stops the heart instantly, and it's nearly impossible to detect unless you're specifically looking for it. If this had been ruled natural causes, we never would have run the tox screen. Martinez made notes. She was admitted to the hospital. Someone had access to her 4-line. More than that, Hayes said. Someone with medical knowledge. Someone who knew exactly how much to inject, how to administer it, how to make it look like a natural cardiac event. Martinez looked up. A doctor. Or a nurse. Someone with access to medications, for equipment, patient rooms. Martinez stood. I need to see the hospital. I need to see security footage. And I need to talk to everyone who had access to Maria Santos between her admission and her death. November 19th, 4 p.m. Martinez arrived at OHSU Hospital with 2 uniformed officers and a warrant. The hospital's legal team met her in the lobby, nervous and defensive. A murder in their facility was a nightmare. Lawsuits, reputation damage, regulatory investigations. We'll cooperate fully. The hospital's general counsel said. But we need to be clear, our staff followed protocol. This is an unthinkable tragedy. Martinez didn't respond. She followed the security director to the hospital's surveillance room, a windowless office filled with monitors showing feeds from hundreds of cameras throughout the facility. I need footage from November 16th, midnight to 5 a.m., all cameras on the ICU floor, Martinez said. The security director pulled up the files, exported them to a hard drive. Martinez took the drive, returned to the police bureau, and spent the next 6 hours reviewing footage. Nurses moving through hallways, doctors making rounds, equipment being transported. Everything looked normal, routine. Then, at timestamp 3:52 a.m., Martinez saw him. A figure in surgical scrubs, mask covering his face, surgical cap pulled low, ID badge flipped backward on his chest. He walked with confidence, purpose, like he belonged there. He approached room 12, Maria Santos's room, glanced left and right, opened the door, disappeared inside. Martinez checked the timestamp. 3:52 a.m. Maria's cardiac arrest alarm went off at 4:02 a.m. 10 minutes. The figure was inside for 10 minutes. At 3:56 a.m., he exited, calm, unhurried. He walked toward the stairwell, disappeared from frame. Martinez rewound the footage, enhanced the image. The quality was grainy, but she could make out details. The badge on his chest, backward, name hidden, but the lanyard clip had a number printed on it. She zoomed in, adjusted contrast, sharpened the pixels. C4517. Martinez pulled up the hospital's badge database, cross-referenced the number. Badge C4517. Dr. Richard Caldwell. Cardiothoracic surgery. Martinez leaned back in her chair, stared at the frozen image on her screen. Richard Caldwell. Respected surgeon. Married. 2 kids. Model employee. And a murderer. But why? What was his connection to Maria Santos? Martinez picked up her phone, called the hospital HR department. I need employment records for Maria Santos and Dr. Richard Caldwell. Any overlap, any interactions, anything that connects them. November 20th, 8 a.m. Martinez sat across from Richard Caldwell in interview room 3 at the Portland Police Bureau. Richard had come voluntarily. Anything to help with the investigation. But Martinez could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair just a little too tightly. Dr. Caldwell, thank you for coming in, Martinez said, her tone neutral. I just have a few questions about Maria Santos. Richard nodded. Terrible tragedy. Maria was an excellent nurse. We're all devastated. How well did you know her? Professionally. We worked in the same hospital but different departments. I'd see her occasionally in the ICU when I had post-op patients there. Martinez opened a folder, pulled out a still image from the CCTV footage, the masked figure entering Maria's room. She slid it across the table. Do you recognize this person? Richard looked at the image. His expression didn't change, but Martinez saw his pupils dilate slightly. Fear response. No, Richard said. Should I? This was taken at 3:52 a.m. on November 16th. This person entered Maria Santos's room. 10 minutes later, she went into cardiac arrest. Richard frowned. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Martinez pulled out another image, the enhanced close-up of the badge number. This badge number belongs to you. C4517. Richard's face went pale. Then recovery. That's impossible. My badge was stolen. When? 2 days before. November 14th. I told my assistant to file a report with security. Martinez made a show of checking her notes. We contacted security. No report was filed. And your assistant says you never mentioned a stolen badge. Richard's jaw tightened. She must have forgotten. It's been a hectic week. Where were you at 3:52 a.m. on November 16th? Asleep. In the on-call room at the hospital. I had an early surgery scheduled. Can anyone confirm that? I was alone. That's the point of an on-call room. Martinez leaned forward. Dr. Caldwell, we have badge swipe records. Your badge accessed the hospital's main entrance at 2:51 a.m. It accessed the medication room at 3:40 a.m. Potassium chloride was logged out under your badge. And then your badge was used to access the ICU floor at 3:50 a.m. Richard's hands clenched. Someone stole my badge and used it. I was asleep. Maria Santos died from a lethal injection of potassium chloride. The same medication that was logged out under your badge 12 minutes before she went into cardiac arrest. Richard stood abruptly. I didn't kill her. I don't know what happened, but I didn't do this. And unless you're charging me with something, I'm leaving. Martinez stayed seated. Sit down, Dr. Caldwell. Richard hesitated, then sat. Martinez pulled out another document, phone records. We pulled your phone records. You texted Maria Santos 47 times over the past 4 months. She texted you back 39 times. That's a lot of communication for 2 people who only knew each other professionally. Richard's face flushed. We were friends. Friends, Martinez repeated. Did your wife know about this friendship? Silence. Martinez leaned back. Here's what I think happened. I think you and Maria Santos were having an affair. I think something went wrong. Maybe she threatened to tell your wife. Maybe she wanted you to leave your family and you refused. Maybe she became a problem, and you decided to eliminate that problem. That's insane, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? You had access to her. You had access to the medication. You knew exactly how to kill her and make it look natural. You're a surgeon, Dr. Caldwell. You understand pharmacology. You understand how potassium chloride works. Richard stood again. I want a lawyer. Martinez smiled. That's your right. But before you go, you should know, we're executing a search warrant on your home, your office, and your car right now. If there's anything you want to tell me, now's the time. Richard walked to the door, hand on the handle, then turned back. I loved her, he said quietly. I didn't kill her. He left. Martinez sat alone in the interview room, reviewing her notes. Richard Caldwell was lying. She knew it. She could feel it. But she needed more than CCTV footage and badge records. She needed motive. She needed the why. At 2 p.m., Martinez's phone rang. It was the forensic team executing the search warrant on Maria's apartment. Detective, you need to see this. November 20th, 3:30 p.m. Martinez stood in Maria Santos's small apartment, looking at the laptop on the kitchen table. The forensic tech had cracked the password, Manila 1996. Maria's birthplace and birth year. Simple, sentimental, and now the key to everything. There's a folder, the tech said, labeled Evidence RC. Martinez's pulse quickened. RC. Richard Caldwell. The tech opened the folder. Inside, dozens of files. Spreadsheets. Screenshots. Photos. Audio recordings. Martinez sat down, started reading. The spreadsheet was meticulous. 7 names. 7 patients. All treated by Dr. Richard Caldwell. All died during surgery in the past 14 months. Next to each name, insurance policy amounts. All over $1 million. All had signed DNR orders immediately before surgery. All had been counseled by Richard Caldwell personally. Martinez's hands shook as she scrolled through the screenshots, surgical notes, medical charts, before and after comparisons showing alterations. Richard had been changing records, covering his tracks, making deliberate surgical errors look like unavoidable complications. Then Martinez found the photos, pictures Maria had taken with her phone of physical medical charts, showing discrepancies between handwritten notes and digital entries. Times changed. Medication dosages altered. Cause of death descriptions modified. And finally, the audio recordings. Martinez clicked on the first file. Static. Breathing. Then a man's voice, slurred, half asleep. Just make it look like a complication. They'll never know. Sign the DNR. They always sign unavoidable loss. Richard Caldwell's voice, talking in his sleep, confessing. Martinez sat back, stunned. Maria Santos hadn't just discovered Richard was having an affair with her. She'd discovered he was a serial killer. She'd documented everything, built a case, and she'd been murdered for it. Martinez picked up her phone, called the district attorney. We've got him, and it's bigger than we thought. Maria Santos wasn't his first victim. She was his 8th. November 21st, 10 a.m. Martinez stood in the conference room at the Portland Police Bureau, presenting her findings to the DA, the chief of police, and a team of investigators. On the screen behind her, photos of 7 patients, all deceased, all treated by Richard Caldwell. Maria Santos discovered that Dr. Richard Caldwell was deliberately killing patients during surgery, Martinez said. He was selecting wealthy patients with large life insurance policies, convincing their families to sign DNR orders, then causing fatal complications during routine procedures. He made it look like surgical errors or unavoidable outcomes. The families collected insurance payouts, and Caldwell received payments disguised as consulting fees. The DA leaned forward. Do we have evidence of the payments? Martinez nodded. Financial records show Caldwell received $340,000 in unexplained deposits over 14 months, all from family members of deceased patients. He helped them navigate insurance claims, referred them to lawyers, co-signed loans. He was financially connected to every single victim. And Maria Santos? The chief asked. Martinez pulled up Maria's photo. She was having an affair with Caldwell. He gave her his login credentials, trusted her completely. She used that access to investigate his surgical record, found the pattern, compiled evidence. On November 14th, she confronted him. Gave him 48 hours to turn himself in or she'd go to the police. Instead, he poisoned her with salmonella bacteria to get her hospitalized, then injected potassium chloride into her to stop her heart. He murdered her to silence her. The DA closed the file. We're reopening investigations into all 7 patient deaths. Exhumation orders are being filed. If we find evidence of deliberate harm, Caldwell's looking at 8 counts of first-degree murder. Martinez smiled grimly. Maria Santos built the case for us. All we have to do is finish what she started. On November 23rd, Richard Caldwell was arrested at his home and charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. The media descended. The story exploded. And Maria Santos, the Filipina ICU nurse who died trying to stop a killer, became a hero. March 15th. 6 months after Maria Santos's death, the Multnomah County Courthouse was packed. Standing room only, cameras lining the back wall, reporters from every major news outlet crowding the hallway outside. The trial of Dr. Richard Caldwell had captivated the nation. Respected surgeon, serial killer, the man who'd murdered patients for profit and killed his mistress to cover it up. It was a story ripped from a thriller, except it was real. The families of the 7 murdered patients sat in the front row. Mothers, fathers, spouses, children. They'd spent months in agony, learning that their loved ones hadn't died from medical complications. They'd been murdered, deliberately, by the doctor they'd trusted. Maria's older sister, Elena, had flown in from the Philippines. She sat alone in the second row, clutching a photo of Maria. She'd sold her house to afford the plane ticket. She needed to be here, needed to see justice for her baby sister. The bailiff stood. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Brennan presiding. Everyone stood as Judge Brennan entered. A stern woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for running a tight courtroom. She took her seat, surveyed the room, banged her gavel. Be seated. We are here for the trial of Dr. Richard Caldwell, who stands accused of 8 counts of first-degree murder. Are the parties ready? The district attorney, Margaret Wells, stood. The state is ready, Your Honor. Richard's defense attorney, Thomas Crane, expensive, slick, brought in from Seattle, stood. The defense is ready, Your Honor. Judge Brennan nodded. Prosecution, your opening statement. Margaret Wells approached the jury, 12 ordinary citizens who would decide Richard Caldwell's fate. She was 52, a career prosecutor who'd handled hundreds of murder cases. But this one was different. This one was personal. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Wells began, over the next several weeks, you're going to hear about a man who took an oath to do no harm. A doctor, a healer, a surgeon entrusted with the most precious thing we have, our lives. And you're going to learn how he betrayed that trust in the most horrific way imaginable. Dr. Richard Caldwell didn't just fail his patients. He murdered them, deliberately, methodically, for money. Wells clicked a remote. The screen behind her displayed photos of the 7 patients. Helen Park, James Liu, Sarah Mitchell, Robert Tran, Gloria Henderson, Michael Chin, Karen Foster. 7 people. 7 routine surgeries. 7 deaths. The families were told these were tragic complications. Unavoidable outcomes. Bad luck. But they weren't. These people were murdered on the operating table by the man sitting right there. She pointed at Richard. He sat motionless, expression blank. Dr. Caldwell selected these patients carefully. They all had one thing in common: life insurance policies exceeding $1 million. He convinced their families to sign do not resuscitate orders before surgery. Then, during the procedures, he deliberately caused fatal complications. Nicked arteries he didn't repair. Administered overdoses of anesthesia. Misplaced bypass grafts. Made it look like surgical errors. And when these patients died, their families collected insurance money and paid Dr. Caldwell consulting fees. He profited from murder. But one person discovered what he was doing. Maria Santos, a 29-year-old ICU nurse. She was having an affair with Dr. Caldwell. He gave her access to his hospital records, trusted her completely, and she used that access to investigate. She found the pattern, compiled evidence, and on November 14th, she confronted him, gave him a choice. Turn yourself in or I go to the police. Dr. Caldwell made his choice. 2 days later, Maria Santos was dead, poisoned, then injected with lethal potassium chloride while she lay helpless in a hospital bed. The same hospital where she worked. The same hospital where Dr. Caldwell had murdered 7 others. But Maria Santos didn't die for nothing. She left behind evidence. A laptop full of documents proving exactly what Richard Caldwell had done. And that evidence is going to convict him. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. CCTV footage showing Richard entering Maria's room at 3:52 a.m. toxicology reports proving lethal potassium injection. Badge swipe records placing Richard at the medication room, logging out potassium chloride with no legitimate patient reason. Financial records showing $340,000 in suspicious payments from victims' families. Phone records proving Richard and Maria were having an affair. Text messages, call logs, metadata. But the most damning evidence came from Maria's laptop. Detective Martinez took the stand, walked the jury through every file in the evidence RC folder. The spreadsheet tracking 7 patients, their insurance policies, their DNR forms, their deaths. The screenshots of altered medical charts, before and after comparisons showing Richard had changed surgical notes to cover his tracks. The photos Maria had taken of physical records showing discrepancies. And finally, the audio recordings. The courtroom fell silent as Maria's voice played over the speakers. This is November 10th. Recording 7. Richard stayed over tonight after his shift. He's been drinking heavily. He fell asleep around 11 p.m. He's talking in his sleep again. Static. Breathing. Then Richard's voice, slurred and unconscious. Have to make it look right. Can't let them know? Sign the DNR. They always sign when you scare them enough. Complications happen. Unavoidable. No one will ever know. The jury stared at Richard. Several jurors had tears in their eyes. Richard's face was pale, expressionless. His attorney objected. Hearsay, unreliable, recorded without consent. But the judge allowed it. The recordings were evidence of state of mind, admissions against interest. Then came the exhumed bodies. All 7 patients had been exhumed and re-autopsied by independent forensic pathologists. One by one, the experts testified. Patient number 1, Helen Park. The femoral artery was nicked during surgery. This is visible in the autopsy. The nick was never repaired. Ms. Park bled out internally. This was not an accident. No competent surgeon would fail to repair a nicked artery. Patient number 2, James Liu. Mr. Liu was given 3 times the normal dose of anesthesia. His chart shows the correct dosage was ordered, but the actual amount administered was lethal. This was deliberate. Patient number 3, Sarah Mitchell. The bypass graft was deliberately misplaced. It was connected to the wrong artery. This caused immediate cardiac failure. This was not a surgical error. This was intentional. On and on. 7 patients. 7 autopsies. 7 murders disguised as medical complications. The defense tried to fight back. Thomas Crane argued that Maria had fabricated evidence, that she was obsessed with Richard, that she doctored the recordings and screenshots to frame him. Maria Santos was unstable, Crane argued. She was having an affair with a married man. She was jealous, scorned, desperate. When Dr. Caldwell tried to end the relationship, she threatened to destroy him. She created this elaborate conspiracy theory to ruin his career. And tragically, she died before she could see her plan through. But the defense crumbled when the prosecution called Richard's hospital assistant to the stand. Dr. Caldwell never reported a stolen badge, she testified. I would have filed the report. That's my job. He never mentioned it. The hospital pharmacist, only Dr. Caldwell's badge could have accessed that potassium chloride. The system requires biometric verification, fingerprint scan. Someone would have had to cut off his finger to fake it. Forensic video analyst. I analyzed the CCTV footage frame by frame. Body language, gait analysis, height, Build. The person entering Maria Santos's room is Dr. Richard Caldwell. Probability: 99.7%. Richard didn't testify. His attorney advised against it. The evidence was too strong. Any testimony would only make it worse. On April 28, the jury deliberated for 8 hours. At 6:42 p.m., they returned with a verdict. The courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan looked at the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Maria Santos, how do you find?" "Guilty." Elena Santos collapsed in tears. The families gasped, embraced, sobbed. "On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Helen Park, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of James Liu?" "Guilty, guilty, guilty, guilty." 8 times. 8 counts of first-degree murder. Richard sat motionless, staring straight ahead. No emotion, no reaction. Judge Brennan scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. May 12th. Sentencing day. The courtroom was packed again. Judge Brennan looked at Richard Caldwell, who stood flanked by his attorneys. "Dr. Caldwell, you have been found guilty of 8 counts of first-degree murder. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to make a statement?" Richard's attorney whispered to him. Richard shook his head. "No statement." Judge Brennan's expression hardened. "Then I will speak. Dr. Caldwell, you violated the most sacred trust in our society, the trust between a patient and their doctor. You took an oath to heal, to protect, to do no harm. Instead, you used your position, your skills, your access to commit murder. You selected vulnerable patients, manipulated their families, and killed them for profit. You showed no mercy, no remorse, no humanity. And when Maria Santos discovered your crimes and tried to stop you, you murdered her too. You silenced the one person brave enough to stand up to you. You are not a doctor. You are a predator. A serial killer who hid behind a white coat and a stethoscope. This court sentences you as follows. For each count of first-degree murder, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. You will die there, and that is more mercy than you showed your victims." The gavel came down. Richard was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back, didn't look at the families, didn't look at Elena. He was gone. The families embraced, crying, relieved. Justice had been served. Elena Santos stood alone, clutching Maria's photo. Detective Martinez approached, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your sister was a hero," Martinez said. "She saved lives by stopping him. She didn't die for nothing." Elena nodded, tears streaming. "She always did the right thing, even when it cost her everything." 2 months later, the hospital settled wrongful death lawsuits with all 8 families for a combined $24 million. New oversight protocols were implemented, mandatory peer review of surgical outcomes, independent audits of patient deaths, whistleblower protections for staff. A scholarship fund was established in Maria Santos's name for Filipino nursing students pursuing careers in the United States. Her story was featured in national news, medical journals, true crime documentaries. She became a symbol, an immigrant who came to America with nothing, worked tirelessly, and gave her life to expose a killer. Elena returned to the Philippines with Maria's ashes. She scattered them in Manila Bay at sunset, the same bay Maria had looked at as a child, dreaming of a better life. "You made it, little sister," Elena whispered. "You made it." Detective Martinez kept a photo of Maria on her desk, a reminder that justice sometimes comes at a terrible cost. And in a maximum security prison in Oregon, Richard Caldwell sat in a 6x8 cell, staring at concrete walls, knowing he'd spend the rest of his life there. He'd gotten away with 7 murders. But Maria Santos, the Filipina ICU nurse he'd underestimated, manipulated, and killed, had stopped him. The hospital CCTV had exposed the affair. But Maria's courage, her intelligence, her evidence had exposed the truth. And the truth, in the end, had won.